So it's my honor to introduce another one of my bosses, a vice chairman of the STARRS Board of Directors, a Vietnam veteran, highly decorated. He's done some really dangerous things, Major General Joe Arbuckle.
Thank you very much. Thanks for being here, and again, thanks for hosting this in your introduction, Ken. It's very nice. It's our pleasure to be here. We're going to present a briefing to you. Tag team, we'll switch off here. Neither one of us can stand too long, that's why we do that. And we're going to go fast. We have a lot of slides to go through. There's a lot of information on them that's going to kind of overwhelm you, so it will be available at our website if you want to take a look at your leisure. So with that, I'm going to get right into it and talk about what is the creed. All right, we need to start with the definition. A simple definition of the creed you might expect. It's just basically a bunch of opinions that formalize some core tenets. Now, what are those core tenets? Let's take a look. Ours are based upon our founding documents, as you might expect, starting with the Declaration of Independence, 1776. And a lot of people don't recognize that Constitution took about 11 years of discussion after that to be formally ratified, as you see up there in 1787. And then it was about another 4 years of discussion before we had the Bill of Rights introduced into our Constitution as the first 10 amendments. And I need to point out, as an Army guy, that our Army is a year older than our country. We celebrated our 250th anniversary, on the 14th of June with that big parade. That was a hoo-ah job. All right, next slide. All right, what is the American creed? It's probably best defined with this slide up here. We're all created equal, as you know, you've heard that before, and endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights. Among those are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now note, it doesn't say guarantee happiness. It says you can pursue it and have the opportunity to do that. Big difference. Also, that kind of stands us apart from other governments and other founding documents because we recognize our rights, as you know, come from our Creator, God. They don't come from the government. That's the huge difference with our country. Continuing with the creed, Samuel Huntington is a well-known political analyst. He died, he's written a lot of books, but he defined some of the elements in our creed that you see written up there, things that you're familiar with, like liberty, equality, democracy, individualism, human rights, and the rule of law, and private property is very important in this, as you probably know. So that was his view of our creed. All right, what about our Constitution and Bill of Rights? I think my personal opinion is we the people are the most important 3 words in our Constitution because the people give power to our government. That's where it comes from. And recall Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, where he also addressed this point when he said, we are the government of the people, by the people, and for the people. Now, my opinion is our government has drifted way away from that last part, for the people. But we're starting to get back to that, aren't we? That's important. What's the source? Judeo-Christian heritage, we believe. And it's very important to note that the national motto, as you know, is "In God We Trust." National motto of our country. It does not say, "In government we trust." Although the socialists and Marxists would like it to read that way. Yeah, we're going to get into that. All right, this is the oath, and some of you veterans put your hand up earlier. A lot of people have taken this oath or something very similar. There's many different versions of it out there, depending upon whether you're an officer, a non-commissioned officer enlisting, or if you're in a political party, or if you're the President of the United States has to take an oath. There's a lot of common denominators in this, but stuff in the middle does vary depending on the oath. What's common? It says, I have to state your name first. I do solemnly swear, and look how it ends up, so help me God. In a church like this, we have to think about that because in the Bible, as you know, you don't take lightly when you swear an oath to God because you might be held accountable for it. And for those of us who have served in the military and those of us in STARRS, that's the reason we're here, frankly, in STARRS. We spend dozens of hours every day fighting and pushing back against what you're going to see as cultural Marxism. The oath stays with us for life, is the bottom line. It goes on to say, I'm going to support and defend what? The Constitution of the United States. It does not say, I'm going to support and defend the president or any political party or even Congress. It says the Constitution. And what is the Constitution? We covered that previously. It's we the people. So in effect, when we swear that oath, we are swearing an oath to the people of the United States as embodied in the Constitution. Getting at the creed again. I want to dig into this one a bit because it's really important. The oath, all enemies, foreign and domestic. It says up there, we're at war. And it's not a shooting war, but nevertheless, it's just as dangerous as a shooting war. Now, how is that? Well, first, let's break it out into foreign and domestic. On the left side, the biggest threat we have, foreign threat we have, is China. You recognize that. Go back to 500 BC. There's a famous Chinese general named Sun Tzu. He was also a very, very famous strategist. He wrote a book, title's up there, The Art of War. And in that book, he said basically, the best victories, the best battles, the best wars are won by not firing a shot. And that's what that says. Subdue the enemy, they're talking about us, without fighting. Now, how are they doing that? Here's Sun Tzu's Art of War book. This is being studied in every military senior school in the United States and across the globe. It's still being studied today because of that premise. And here's another book. It's called Unrestricted Warfare. You see it up there. It's written by two Chinese colonels who were on active duty, and they laid out their battle plan in 1999 to defeat us. It's not a secret, and they had been following that battle plan. Here are some tenets in that. Compel the enemy to submit to their will through Sun Tzu's approach. How do they do that? Less military violence and more political, economic, and also now today the technology is involved in the violence. They also say that war is war in this book I just showed you, and that gets back to the title, Unrestricted Warfare. They'll do anything to win, and they are. You've seen them involved in intellectual property theft. You've heard about that in the United States. It's been going on for a very long time. In addition, they've infiltrated our colleges and universities for decades into our laboratories, stealing our research and development. That's part of their warfare plan. And also, they're buying hundreds of thousands of acres of farmland. You probably know about that. And also, tens of thousands of acres around our military facilities. Now, why are they doing that? Because that's one of their techniques of their warfare, to subdue us eventually. Now, I want to shift over to the domestic side for a second and cover that, because I concluded many years ago the biggest threat to our survival is not the foreign threat, it's the domestic. Now, why is that? I'm the informal leader of a group called Flag Officers for America, flag meaning retired generals and admirals. And occasionally we put out letters where we talk about key actions and events that are happening in the United States. We ask for some retired generals and admirals to sign those letters. All right, just about 4 months into Biden's administration, back in May of 2021, we wrote this letter and 220 retired admirals and generals signed it. And I want to read you a few sentences out of this that gets to this point on the right side. Our nation is in deep peril. We are in a fight for our survival as a constitutional republic like no other time since our founding in 1776. The conflict is between supporters of socialism and Marxism versus supporters of a constitutional republic. Now that's the opening statement in this. Again, 4 years ago. And it goes on to define about 12 major national security threats, such as open borders, the rule of law, election integrity, and so forth. But ironically, well, not ironically, we saw this coming. You'll see, you'll recognize what I'm talking about here. The last bullet of those 12 says this: the mental and physical condition of the commander-in-chief cannot be ignored. He must be able to quickly make accurate national security decisions involving life and limb anywhere, day or night. And recent Democrat inquiries into the nuclear code procedure sends a dangerous national security signal to our nuclear-armed adversaries, raising the question about who is in charge. We must always have an unquestionable chain of command. That was 4 years ago. And you know what's going on today with President Biden. So that's the domestic war that we're talking about. You're going to hear about the cultural roots and how it was launched in the 1960s and how it's targeted our institution, focusing on education. Ron's going to talk about that next. It's gone from critical race theory into DEI. And if you want evidence, there's a few examples of this war. Look at the students and faculty riots across our nation, the colleges and universities. Hamas flags, terrorist flags, flying. And we have a flag of another nation being flown in those riots, Mexico. Meanwhile, our national flag is being burned and trampled on. That's evidence of this war. Another is the riots, Antifa, BLM. Anti-Semitism is on its rise, as you know, and that's part of this also. And we have an Islamist communist running for mayor in New York City, and he's likely to win. And we also have one now that's running in Minneapolis. Now, those of us that swore an oath to support and defend our country, that's very hard to take because that's been our enemy all these years when we served. That is Marxism. Okay, next slide. I'm going to turn it over now to my tag team buddy, Ron.
Thank you, sir. Okay, that's the good story in the presentation. So we flipped a coin, and I got stuck with telling you the bad stuff. So, but I think awareness is a weapon. So when we become more aware of what we're dealing with, and we have tools to deal with it, we've got a duty as American citizens to do something about it. And so hopefully part of tonight will be motivating you to realize you need to be a soldier in this cultural war and prepared to do something about it. So what is the threat? The domestic threat. It's an ideology. And you can summarize it in 3 words right now: critical race theory. And it flowed from a series of critical theories, starting with critical theory in the 1930s, becoming critical legal theory in the 1960s and 70s, and now most recently critical race theory. It started with the Frankfurt School. They moved from Germany when Hitler was rising in power because the contest in Germany was between the communists and the fascists, not the liberals. So the contest was between 2 ideological groups well left of the political center. So they escaped Germany, came to the United States, set up residence at Columbia University in New York, and it was called the Frankfurt School. And so what they did, they were able to convert that theory, that ideology, into a praxis. How do we now integrate that into our institutions, into the minds and the consciousness of people? What was called diversity, equity, and inclusion. Okay, for us, we woke up on July 7th of 2020. A friend of General Bishop's and myself asked us if you were aware that the football coaches at the Air Force Academy put out a 3-minute video. It's on the front page of the Colorado Springs Gazette. And you remember we had the lock-ins, so we couldn't go anywhere. So I looked at this video, and I'm going to show it to you.
We are the Boat Brotherhood. One team, one family.
We are a diverse team.
As Falcons in our team huddle, the goal is to score,
but we will serve to reach beyond the playing field.
to build communities and our country.
To support all backgrounds, black, brown, and white.
To pursue greater opportunities.
When it comes to education, justice, healthcare, and peace,
So we may all win in life.
Our mission extends beyond winning.
Our mission is to stand against racism.
To promote diversity and inclusion.
Our mission is to demonstrate
and fight for respect and human dignity.
We aim to tell our country and the world that Black Lives Matter.
And to cure the disease of discrimination.
And racism in our country.
Black lives have not been
And are not treated as equal in our society.
Racial profiling,
Jim Crow,
Mass incarceration,
redlining.
Police brutality.
From the Bolt Brotherhood,
Enough is enough.
this is not a political choice of Marxism or capitalism.
This is the basic regard and respect for human life and dignity.
This is why Black Lives Matter.
If the intent of our country is justice and liberty for all.
We must first acknowledge that Black Lives Matter.
We must stand in unity for racism to end.
We stand in unity to be part of the solution.
It's not enough for us to be not racist.
It's time to be anti-racist.
It's time to be anti-racist.
It's time to be anti-racist.
It's time for me to recognize my bias.
It's time to use
my voice,
my talent,
my platform,
to stand against unjust police brutality
and institutional discrimination.
Take action, take responsibility, and take a stance.
Listen to understand.
Listen with an open heart.
Listen to our experiences.
And empathize with the pain that racism causes so many.
Educate yourself on the role that race plays in our history.
We will fight for fair treatment.
Justice and equality of Black Americans.
Brown Americans and all Americans.
This goes beyond the football field.
Because Black Lives Matter.
Because Black Lives Matter.
Because Black Lives Matter.
It's time to open our eyes.
It's time to open our eyes.
And to fight and serve for justice.
It's time to make our country and our world a better place.
It's bigger than football.
It's bigger than football.
It's bigger than football.
There's no neutral nor in between when it comes to racism.
You have to take a stance.
Because the Bolt Brotherhood believes Black Lives Matter.
When I watched that video, it made me sick. When I watched that video, it made me sick, ill. I know some of these men. They're decent husbands, fathers, great coaches, great mentors for the young men that they're developing into team players and whatever. But 2 months prior to that, George Floyd had his incident. And so riots were taking place across the nation. So a lot of people were really emotional about this concept called systemic racism. That's what they were implying. The day after that video came out, the superintendent at the time issued a letter to the Academy family talking about systemic racism in America to include the Academy, and he directed that an assessment be conducted with a report due to him September of 2020, just before the next superintendent shows up. He wanted to solve that problem, institute policies and procedures to deal with systemic racism. When I saw that, I'm thinking, really? I know there's racism. It does exist. And when it does, you humiliate the individual or correct them, say, no, we don't do that in America. So just to give you an example, this was in 2021. This article, the headline, July 6, 2021, was an op-ed from a professor at the Air Force Academy. This is a month after the Secretary of Defense, testifying before Congress, said, we don't teach CRT at the academies. But yet this professor comes out, says, I'm a professor at a U.S. military academy. Here's why I teach critical race theory. Okay, so now we have people coming to us because we've shown some interest in what's happening there, and more people were sharing that interest. And so General Bishop was like a magnet. People were coming to him and saying, hey, General Bishop, do you know about this? Have you heard about this? So here's one here, white boy number 2. A female instructor called Air Force Academy males, white boy 1 and white boy 2, and said, all you white boys look alike to me. That was during the first day of an econ class. Okay, then we've got this five and dive attitude. Many Air Force Academy cadets say they've had enough of this DEI. And so once they have fulfilled their 5-year obligation, they're going to punch, five and dive. Wow, the taxpayers have spent $450,000 sending that person out the door with a Bachelor of Science degree and lieutenant bars on their shoulder. And that's their payback to the American people? 5 years? Well, can you blame them? The culture in the Air Force and the Army and the Marines and the Navy was changing for a lot of these people. Okay, then we have honor code violations. A male officer, professor, thinks he is a woman and wears female Air Force uniforms, skirts. Did Air Force Academy cadets have to lie by requiring them to call this man a she because of DEI? And we see that happening in Colorado right now, where they want to penalize shop owners if they don't address people by their proper pronoun. And then we had this political rant. This is a retired Air Force Lieutenant Colonel, Air Force instructor, ranted for 10 minutes in his class regarding the new removal of DEI and transgender policy. Saying, F Trump, F Hegseth, I'm going to fight this effing SHIT. We're not going to put up with this effing SHIT. Maybe I'll resign. This is a type of role model we have in front of cadets at the service academies. And then we had the purple cords. When the superintendent directed the assessment of systemic racism at the academy, we filed a FOIA asking for a copy of that assessment. They stonewalled us. It took a lawsuit by Judicial Watch to get that report released. So they stonewalled us for over 2 years. So what did they do during that 2 years? They trained 90 cadets to be diversity inclusion officers and NCOs in each unit, 2 per unit, 40 squadrons, 4 groups, and a wing. And they wore the purple rope on their shoulder, signifying that they were the diversity inclusion political officer 24/7. And then finally, we saw viewpoint discrimination. And Mike Rose and General Bishop got involved with this one. They were going to boot a midshipman months from graduation because he had tweeted concerns for his parents, who were Los Angeles police officers, during all these riots that were taking place because of BLM and Antifa. His tweet got repeated, and before you know it, people were calling him a racist, a bigot, and they were going to disenroll him. These were court cases, and Mike Rose and General Bishop played a key role in keeping him at the Naval Academy. He graduated, he's now flying fighters. Okay, so we figured we need to get more formal in terms of what we can do about this. So that led to the creation of STARRS. It's a 501c3, and it was established in April of 2021. Okay, in our title we have the word radicalism. We started out with being against racism, but then we realized it's more than racism. It's ideological. It's more than racism. So we adopted a definition from Michigan State University that says radicalism represents the beliefs or actions of individuals, groups, or organizations who advocate for social and/or political reform to achieve an alternative vision of society. That definition morphed since we've been an organization. It started out an alternative vision of our founding. So they were using the founding documents as the anchor in terms of how they defined something being radical or not. Okay, so the original vision of America, as General Arbuckle described, the Declaration of Independence, our Constitution and Bill of Rights. Now, compare that to what we're dealing with right now. This vision or ideology that threatens America is what we would call cultural Marxism, and it's manifested in DEI. That's the domestic threat that General Arbuckle was talking about earlier. Okay, so we're talking about comparing visions. Let's look at important concepts like education versus ideology. Education relates to knowledge, which is the intersection of truth and beliefs. And Plato wrote about this millennia ago. And it represents the intersection. So not all beliefs are true. So those that are established based upon some indisputable truth then is considered knowledge. There's nothing moral or immoral about it. It's just, it is. Ideology, on the other hand, is based on sentiment or feelings about beliefs, and they can be either true or false. But the key condition here is ideology is prescriptive. Thou shalt. And so the distinction is what is, and that's what we're educating people on, versus what is desired. And that's being pushed through ideology called CRT and DEI. Okay, we talked about our motto, "In God we trust." Here's E pluribus unum, which really describes the American creed, from many one. And this this guided education earlier in our history. And education was oriented towards promoting stable families and communities, living their lives based upon Christian tradition and manifested in a wholesome sense of duty and accountability. We've lost a lot of accountability today in America. And so if there's two words that describe STARRS' modus operandi, it's transparency and accountability. So anybody can attend our meetings. We open it to the public. We have nothing to hide. So cultural Marxism, as we've mentioned, is manifested via this ideology called critical race theory and applied versus diversity, equity, and inclusion. And the key here is it's designed to divide Americans by creating class warfare. And so the distinction here, when the Frankfurt School came to America, they were Marxist communists, but they realized that America had a large middle class, and it was a buffer between what they would call the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. So they had to modify that class warfare into political ideology groups, labeled as oppressors and the oppressed. And the ultimate oppressor in America, according to these folks, is the white male. And it gets even more egregious if that white male is married to a woman and happens to be a practicing Christian. That's the ultimate oppressor. So real quick, the roots of this ideology, we can trace back as far as 1843. And that's in a letter from Marx to Arnold Ruge. In that letter, he talks about critical philosophy. So that word critical starts to enter the language. And then later, he talks about the importance of obtaining forgiveness for its sins. The people that wanted to buy what Aristotle and Augustine and all these great thinkers and philosophers have passed down through the ages. Knowledge that people had to confess for subscribing to that. Well, 5 years later is when the Communist Manifesto was published and released. And remember, that was 13 years before the American Civil War. So these ideas were already starting to penetrate the consciousness in America. Now, the individual that laid the political conditions to make America really vulnerable to this was Woodrow Wilson. Former professor at president of Princeton, he was the one that pushed politics-administration dichotomy. And he was saying that, even though our constitutional republic calls for electing people that establish our laws and how we will govern ourselves, that they weren't smart enough. So he had to bring in experts as part of the unelected bureaucracy. And so he was pushing that kind of a concept, the administrative state. And we see it today. The fourth branch of government, the federal government. So he also saw the Constitution as a living document. So he's laid the foundation, the political foundation for this. Okay, so now here's some of the key players that started to deploy this, the practice of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I've got 5 individuals here. There are many more, but Bella Dodd was a product of the Frankfurt School. She was a teacher at Hunter College across town, and her other teachers were saying, hey, Bella, you can attend some free courses over at Columbia. They're teaching us all about social justice and what we can do to take care of the oppressed. So that's how she was recruited and inducted into the Communist Party. She was later excommunicated from the Communist Party, but that's all that is told in her book, School of Darkness. Douglas Hyde is a British individual. He wrote a book called I Believed. Wow. Anyway, it was all about social justice. He was on his way to become a minister, and he got recruited because of all the poverty and what he considered to be social injustice, and so he joined this group to do something about it. Manning Johnson wrote a book called Color, Communism, and Common Sense. He was recruited into the Communist Party, and they even sent him to Moscow to be trained and educated in terms of organizing people and deploying the communist ideology in America. Whittaker Chambers, former editor at Newsweek magazine, he became a member of the Communist Party, and he chronicled his experience in a book called Witness. And then finally, Louis Francis Boudin's was the editor for the Daily Worker in New York and Chicago. These 3 books that these authored are pretty powerful. The cry is peace. He said, and they keep telling you, they're focused on peace, but they weren't. While they were saying that, they were working to divide people and to promote revolution in America. And then his other book, The Techniques of Communism, in that book, he lays out Aesopian language as one of the techniques that they use to deceive people, like this, the cry is peace. And so DEI is like that. I mean, who's against diversity and inclusion? You know, those are important concepts. But it's when they use that to push for equity, to achieve equal outcomes, that's when it becomes coercive. And then, of course, Herbert Marcuse, he's probably the leading advocate here in America for the CRT DEI stuff. And he was known as father of the New Left in the 1990s. And he talked about liberating tolerance would mean intolerance against movements from the right and toleration of movements from the left. Very influential, and he was probably the biggest advocate for feminism and some of the other movements that took place in America. This individual, Paulo Freire, a Brazilian Marxist, was invited to come to America. He spent time at Harvard, and he had an influence in our educational systems. And so he inspired the 1619 Project that you've heard about. And two authors in particular I'd recommend if you want to learn more about it. Christopher Rufo in his America's Cultural Revolution, and Stanley Ridgely in his book, Brutal Minds. Okay, as an example of the manifestation of critical theory was critical legal studies. And here it inspired feminism, race and law, postmodernism, economic theory law. So again, it was all based on oppressors and oppressed. This screenshot, taken in the 1960s, shows how they were already using Aesopian language to start grooming us, to start thinking along certain lines. But it was not new or organic. And so this slide here was put together by Kendall Qualls, who formed Take Charge in Minneapolis, Minnesota, after the George Floyd incident. He was tired of people feeling that they had to be dependent upon the government. So Kendall and his wife Sheila formed Take Charge, and they are doing magnificent work. He's on our board of advisors, by the way. So these 6 panels here is an example of how the left was using language to start shaping our consciousness. So the upper left, you can see the scale, the number of times these terms showed up in the news based on LexisNexis searches, pretty flat up until about 2012. So the upper left is systemic racism, upper right, unconscious bias, middle left, white privilege, middle right, white supremacy, bottom left, diversity and inclusion, bottom right, whiteness. The other slide I'll share with you is he tracked sentiment on race relations over time. You can see the blue and the red lines. The white adults and black adults were pretty comfortable with where we were in terms of race relations. Again, up until about 2012, and then they started dropping off. About that same time, you saw an increase in the number of diversity officers now that were being hired in organizations. So they were moving the needle. And so at this time, I want to hand it back to my colleague to give you some more scary stuff.
Happy to do that. Yeah, thanks, Professor. You know why we call him Professor now, right? Before I get on into the next chart after this, we haven't, I realize, told you what our 2 strategic goals are within STARRS. The first one is to get rid of DEI, eradicate it from the military. The second, which was adopted after that, is to get rid of the illegal COVID mandatory vaccination policy within the military. And we believe we played a key role in making that happen by working with Congress and getting that into congressional language, which required the Secretary of Defense to stop that mandate. Now, the story's not over. There's been thousands and thousands of our soldiers harmed by that policy, the illegal vaccination, in terms of their personnel actions taken against them, negative personnel action, and some actual physical harm. So we are still pursuing that part of the mission as well as the first. So that's what we're doing. All right, now, as Ron likes to say, you better strap on your seat belt for this one. It's about an 8-minute video that was done by our fabulous webmaster, Cindy Swishoff. She is a 22-year veteran of the CIA as a counterintelligence analyst. And so Cindy is able to go on the web and search around and finds all kinds of information and then connects it together into a logical whole. And that's what she's done with this video. So here we go.
Your mission remains fixed, determined, inviolable. It is to win our war. Everything else in your professional career is but corollary to this vital dedication. That in war there is no substitute for victory. That if you lose, the nation will be destroyed. That the very obsession of your public service must be duty, honor, country.
Before I get into this chart, a couple comments. Matt Lohmeier, you saw there, he's a friend of ours in STARRS, and he's executive vice president of STARRS right now. And as you know, on 2 May, I think, you probably know, he passed through the Senate Armed Services Committee for his confirmation to be the Undersecretary of the Air Force, the number 2 person. And in talking to him today, there was another hurdle that was supposed to be met tonight in the Senate where they would vote on closure, which is one step that's needed before the entire Senate can vote on his final confirmation, which may happen tomorrow. Well, thanks for your applause on that video. It's pretty powerful. We'll pass that on to Cindy. She'll appreciate that. Yeah. And by the way, as you probably know, recruiting has turned around since President Trump came on board. Yeah. Same thing with Pete Hegseth. What a great team. Military appreciates that, and retention is also up. So we're headed in the right direction again. But this stuff, this cultural Marxism, is still embedded to a large degree within our military, and we're still working to help root that out. All right, now, this interesting slide right here, Ron has already covered a lot of what it really means. It's a great visual when you think of what is DEI. Think of it as a Trojan horse. The words are great, diversity, equity, inclusion. I mean, as Ron said, who could be against that? But when you turn it back and get into it, it's really toxic to our fundamental values in our country and our warrior ethos. So inside that Trojan horse called DEI is Marxism. And the problem is, I'll get to all these other points on here on the next slide in a little bit more detail. We were being asked over a year ago to connect how DEI hurts military readiness, and that's what this busy slide does. But it reads very easily, top to bottom, left to right. At the top, we heard from Ron that Marx did the Communist Manifesto, 1848, and his purpose was to cause division, haves versus have-nots, based upon economic disparities within Russia. Okay, that's the ideology behind it. That didn't work, as Ron said, in our cultural revolution in the 60s, because they looked around the Marxists and realized we're in pretty good shape. We have a strong middle class. That's not going to work. What are we going to do? We're going to go to race and divide people based on race and other identity factors. The purpose is to divide people, to create this oppressor versus oppressed mentality. Whites are the oppressors. In this case, blacks are being oppressed. They are the victims. And then that creates a victimhood mentality, which then justifies special privileges. And that's what I'm getting to in the military. Special privileges for minorities to advance them. And how does that happen? By lowering standards of admissions to places like our academies. It lowers standards for selections on things like promotion boards, selections for command, key assignments, and so forth. The standards are lowered, and that's the equity part of DEI. Equity means common outcomes. You lower the standards down to reach some level to a lowest common denominator so you can accomplish what you want to accomplish in whatever you're doing. So that's what's dangerous about this thing, with that victimhood mentality. Now, our military, up until DEI came along, has always been driven by two things: equal opportunity for everybody, no matter what your skin color, your sex is, or whatever else, and meritocracy. Pick the best people qualified for any particular job or consideration. That's the way it should be. DEI challenges that right in the face. What are the readiness impacts? Well, anytime, obviously, if you lower standards, like on a physical fitness test, let's say, so that, in this case, females can pass to get into a combat arms, you're automatically then lowering performance. And when you lower performance, you're going to lower readiness. That's the implication through all this. That's how it results. Now, the military's always had on the far right side this one team, one fight battle model. And that's all about having the team focus on one mission, one purpose. It's on the team, it's not on anything else. And loyalty is to the team, it's not to any particular identity group. And lastly, they must have total trust and confidence in each other for their very lives. You can't be in a foxhole, a white guy and a black guy, and then start worrying about, well, if I get hit, is that person going to risk their lives to save me? We can't have that. We've never had that in our military until this kind of a philosophy came along. So that's the linkage between Marx, his ideology, DEI, readiness in our military. Okay, I'm going to pass it back to Professor Ron.
Thank you, sir. Okay. So those last two slides are really tools for you, because the Trojan horse slide is a great picture that summarizes what we're dealing with and how deceptive it is. And the next slide, you can kind of walk through it like General Arbuckle just did. Now, if you give this to other people, they're going to say, oh, yeah, that's what you say. So we're going to provide you some additional evidence to support our understanding of this problem. So the Military Leadership Diversity Commission was chartered by the Black Congressional Caucus in the fiscal year 2009 National Defense Authorization Act. That took place in the fall of 2008. Okay, so 3 years later, they issued their final report, and it was what you see here, From Representation to Inclusion. On page 18 in particular, in the introduction, they really are explicit about what they're doing. So they talk about diversity management calls for creating a culture of inclusion. Now notice they don't use the word assimilation. They use the word inclusion. And the distinction there is very, very powerful. Creating the culture will involve changing the way in which people relate to one another. In other words, we don't have a choice. We're not free to be autonomous and to apply our personality, our experiences, whatever. No, they're going to kind of guide us and coach us into how we treat each other. They said, although good diversity management rests on a foundation of fair treatment, it is not about treating everyone the same. See, this is where equity comes into play. And favoritism. This can be a difficult concept to grasp, especially for leaders, such as us in this room, who grew up with the equal opportunity-inspired mandate to be both color and gender blind. Oh, no, we can't be color or gender blind. We have to be color conscious, gender conscious. And you're going to see why that's important later on, because General Arbuckle is going to acquaint you with a gentleman by the name of Gramsci. And then finally, they said blindness to difference, however, can lead to a culture of assimilation in which differences are suppressed rather than leveraged. These are quotes from that document. And so inclusion is better than assimilation, because inclusion requires you to be accepted into the organization. So assimilation, you have the choice. I want to be an American. And so you adopt the American creed and you live your life as an American. Now, that was in 2011, March of 2011. 5 months later, President Obama issued Executive Order 13583. That was mandating now diversity and inclusion, personnel and programs across the entire federal government. We're talking thousands of new people, millions of dollars to pay them. And what exactly are they going to do? Well, Stanley originally would tell you, in the research he's done, they haven't done anything except change attitudes. That's it. Okay, President Trump then, when he comes into office, he was late. I mean, this was, 2 or 3 months before he's handing the reins over to his successor. He issued Executive Order 13950 to cease and desist all this DEI stuff. And we don't get into it in this presentation, but this is where Matt Lohmeier comes into play. This is where he became a modern Billy Mitchell and paid a price for it, but he's soon going to be rewarded for his heroism and courage. Okay, so when President Biden comes into office, he rescinds Trump's executive order and issues 3 more, doubling down on this diversity, equity, and inclusion. And then President Trump comes in, rescinds Biden's executive orders, and issues more. And you see 3 of them here. And these were on day 1. And I have to tell you, on behalf of our STARRS leadership team, how gratified we were to see a lot of language in these executive orders that we were very familiar with. So STARRS had a huge thumbprint on those executive orders. Okay, now, We call this executive order ping pong. And so it's going back and forth, back and forth. So that's why we are working very vigorously with Congress to get them to codify these changes, these policy changes. Okay, so real quick, I want to walk you through the genesis of STARRS. So the timeline, as we mentioned earlier, began with that football coach video in July of 2020. Okay, the superintendent said there's systemic racism. We asked for a copy of the assessment he directed, and it was ugly. It took a lawsuit to get it. But we've also filed other FOIAs, 61 total, 61 FOIAs since we've been in existence, 5 years. 25 have been partially answered, 18 not answered at all, and 18 remain open. And so again, we talked about lawsuits, and we have another one that's still open and one that's pending and possibly a couple others. But all this stuff we were heavily invested in when COVID hit the fan, and it took us several months to decide as an organization that we were going to get involved. Because as veterans, as you know, when they say it's time to get a vaccination, you bend over and you take the shot. But now all of a sudden, we're learning some very dangerous things about what was happening here with this COVID vaccination. So on 2nd of June of this year, we sent a letter to the President of the United States asking him to grant pardons and amnesty for all those that were harmed by the COVID vaccination mandate. So, as our General Counsel Mike Rose will tell you, BCMR stands for Boards of Correction of Military Records, Boards for the Correction of Military Records. There are cases in front of that organization that have been there for decades. And so a lot of people are saying, well, that's the solution here for these people that were harmed by this mandate. Well, we're not going to mess with that. President Trump pardoned an individual that was harmed by this COVID vax, and we're encouraging him to let that be the precedent and reach out to the other 8,000 plus active duty people that were forced out of service with general discharge conditions. 13 have taken Secretary Hegseth up on being allowed to come back into the service. Only 13 out of over 8,000. So we talked about lack of trust earlier. You think that might be a factor? So Hegseth is doing a lot to renew that trust. To give you a flavor, this is an example of some of the members we have on our leadership team. Now that gentleman in the civilian coat in the upper left is Drew Dix, Medal of Honor winner. Great friend of General Arbuckle's, lives down in Pueblo. And so he's on our board of advisors, and he's really helping us greatly. But you can see other members here, from Lieutenant General, we've got all the way down to Major, and we've got individuals that were senior executive service members at the Pentagon. Lanny Cass, third from the right on the bottom, Dr. Lanny Cass. She is amazing. Check her out on our website. And then Amber, Undersecretary. We got 8 officers, only 1 employee. That's Matt Lohmeier. we brought Matt on as executive vice president to take my job, but he got a better job. So, and then we've got 10 directors, 39 members of our board of advisors, Bill Scott being one of them back here. We've got Bob McKinney has rallied 167 Americans from across the nation to join STARRS as volunteers. We haven't really yet activated them yet, but we've got them in place, and they're just raring to go. And then we've got 28 state leaders. 4,000 on our mailing list, which isn't bad. And then we collaborate with other organizations, 12 roughly, to include the Center for Military Readiness, headed up by Elaine Donnelly. But the other 2 that we work closest with are the MacArthur Society of West Point graduates and the Calvert Task Group, and that represents the Naval Academy. STARRS is DoD-wide. We represent all the services. Okay, in terms of impact, if you look at this list, and I'm not going to read it to you, this is all the research, writing, and media activities that we've been involved in. You know, we've sent 50 open letters, 175 media appearances and mentions. So you can see the list. We've been busy, and this is from volunteers. spending our time to do what we can to get our nation back on track. Okay, in terms of our congressional impact, we've had 2 delegations go to Capitol Hill, one in 2024, one in 2025, and both of them led by General Bishop. Met with senators, representatives, staffers. This most recent visit was accompanied by this joint position paper that we published. This came out in October of 2024. And so it was before the election. And so a lot of the papers talked about getting rid of DEI and other things, which the president took care of with executive orders. So we were happy to have had an impact. But other things here, in terms of, we're talking about national defense reform, is way overdue. And so anyway, we had some input here with these position papers. And in terms of legal, there's a lot of stuff on the slide, and I'm not going to read it here. But this is Mike Rose and his legal team of about 10 volunteers that are working these things. FOIAs, lawsuits. The Board of Visitors was suspended by the Secretary of Defense illegally. That's a congressionally mandated body. So they worked to get that renewed and reactivated. So Mike and his team have had a huge impact here legally. Some additional stuff, General Bishop was invited to serve on a panel at the Heritage Foundation, a national level activity. It had a huge impact. Matt Lohmeier served on an Arizona State University commission here as it relates to civic education in the military. And of course, General Arbuckle mentioned Flag Officers for America is having a related and parallel impact. We've had events. This past September, we held one in Arizona, and good turnout. We had 5 speakers. The individual that hosted it, he's already reached out to us. He wants to host another one. And this one, he talked about, they're going to have, in February, 2,000 pastors at a conference. And I think he was planning to see it would be great if STARRS could get them animated and helping to get the word out. So we're hoping that that will happen. And then to wrap it up, on our website, here's links to it. We give you a real complete summary of our achievements for 2023 and 2024. And I invite you to visit that sometime if you want to get a deeper feel for what we've been doing. And so with that, I want to turn it back to my colleague who's going to kind of close it out with good news.
Thank you, Ron. Okay, running a little bit long here, so I'm going to move kind of fast and still cover the key points. Observations. This slide talks about the fact that we've been fighting communism, Marxist communism, for a long time. And in fact, during my 32 years on active duty in the Army, 22 of those were involved with fighting Marxism. Starting with Vietnam, of course, the Cold War up until 1991, all the proxy wars we had along with that. And so that's been our major focus. But again, as I said earlier, it was external. We weren't thinking internal until recently. Next chart. This one I want to spend a minute on. Look at the title up there. Over 95,000 Americans were killed fighting Marxism going back to Korea. There were about 37,000 killed in the Korean War. Who were they fighting? The Communist North Koreans and the Communist Chinese. Then we fast forward about 10 years into Vietnam, and over 58,000 brave and loyal Americans were killed, again, by communists. Communist North Vietnamese, Communist Viet Cong, supported by Communist Chinese. Now, this is kind of interesting here. I won't spend time on it, but that picture, Cindy, our webmaster, put that in there. That's 1972, December, Phuket Air Base, Vietnam. Those are all Air Force pilots, except that one guy on the right is an Army guy who was invited in. These guys were flying over me in Ford air controllers for a long time, and they invited me in for a little fun. And a shower and some cold beer, so I took advantage of that. We had a good time. And then I got my weapons back the next day and headed back out the field. But the key point on this is, throughout history, communism has been a dead-end street. It results in the death and destruction of millions of people. And if you go on the web and just do a search, how many people were killed by Stalin, Mao Tse-tung, and Pol Pot, you're going to come up with different numbers because nobody knows for sure, but it's around 100 million people of their own people that they killed. starvation camps, work camps, and outright murder. That's the dead-end street that Marxism and communism is. Observations. We've just been plain duped, as the slide says up there. We've been deceived about what's really been going on. But meanwhile, there have been books, many, many books written about this in the past. You see some examples. We just didn't pay attention. Long March Through the Institutions. This is a Marxist communist, an Italian Gramsci. And it's pretty sobering if you read what he says. Socialism is precisely the religion that must overwhelm Christianity. In New Order, socialism will triumph by first capturing the culture via infiltration of schools, universities, churches, the media, by transforming the consciousness of society. That was their philosophy, and unfortunately it's been working. DEI. This just points out that there's been tens of thousands of people trained in DEI, formally trained in it, and hundreds of millions of dollars dedicated to that ideology. Two examples there just of the University of Michigan over a year ago, 500 DEI people at the university, $300 million annually for them. And DOJ found $370 million in the Department of Education just for the agents. And there's a lot more than that. That's just two agencies there. This is important. When you get a chance, go on your web and search the 45 communist goals read into the congressional record. This happened back in 1963 by the congressman up there. You say, there are 45. This is just a few of the key ones. I'm going to run down those really fast and think about, have they been successful? They want to take over our political parties, get control of schools and teacher unions, infiltrate the press, gain control of the media, eliminate prayer and religion in schools, discredit our Constitution, it's inadequate, and call our founding fathers racist, which they've been doing. Belittle American culture, discourage teaching of American history, infiltrate and gain control of unions and big business, promote the United Nations, one world government, use student riots to foment unrest, think about that one, infiltrate churches, discredit the Bible, discredit the family, and take kids away from the family, put them in control of the state. We see some of that happening with laws right here in Colorado. Support violence and insurrection as a legitimate ways to incite special interest groups, break down standards of morality, promote pornography and homosexuality, etc. Those are just a few of those goals. So what do you think? Have they been successful? Yeah. Sadly true. But the good news is we're pushing back. We're pushing back against this right now, and we're gaining ground. Future of STARRS, well, basically we're going to continue to march what we've been doing, but a little bit different focus. The President and Secretary of Defense have issued great orders to get rid of DEI, get it out of the military. Well, it's one thing to issue orders, it's another to ensure they're followed on. And so that's kind of what we're doing right now, is to help look, be eyes and ears, and work with the Department of Defense and others on reference what we find. We're going to continue to educate and push legislation to support getting rid of DEI and remedy those damages that have been caused. And actually, it's more than what Ron mentioned. There were about 8,400 kicked out because they refused the vax. About 55% of those got less than honorable discharges, but there are about 37,000 that had requested religious exemptions and suffered negative personnel actions because of that. Only 400 of those 37,000 requests for religious exemptions were granted. That tells you they weren't serious about doing it. All right, as part of my Flag Officers for America responsibility, I read part of the letter that we signed way back in May of 21. A lot of citizens came to us and said, okay, we got your message. What can we do about it? So we put out the Citizens Action Plan, and it told them to get involved at the grassroots level and look at things like education first. Take back control of your school boards and all these other things that can be done, reference education. Political, get involved in your local government. Run for office even. Attend your town council meetings, your mayor's meetings, your board of county commissioners. Speak up. Politically, that's really important. Law enforcement, make sure you elect sheriffs and district attorneys that have the right philosophy, supporting our Constitution and government. Media, get involved with the media, write letters to the editor, organize churches, which you've done here extremely well. And I've skipped over a bunch of things in there that are important. You can take a look at that on our website. All right, what can be done? We can sign up for a mailing list like Ron talked about, get a newsletter, there's no obligation. We are a nonprofit, we do have some overhead costs, so if you're so inclined, donations are appreciated. And this will be the closing short video.
Okay, a big thanks to the Church for All Nations for allowing us to tell our story. And a big thank you to all of you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to be entertained by all the scary stuff here tonight. So I think we have a couple minutes for question.
I'll take this one. Okay. That way you can. Okay, so we'll allow a couple questions, and only a couple. I'm sorry, but.
Yeah, just a quick comment. In your threats right at the very beginning, you didn't have cyber on the foreign side or candidly on the other side. And I think that's certainly one of the areas right now we're very much affected by. You know, it includes cyber in that foreign threat and the other.
Good point. Excellent point.
Okay. One or two more.
How many flag officers or people that have graduated the academies from 2008 until Trump became president, how many are in our military that are actually Marxists or communists? And what do you do about them?
That's a really great question. Our sense is it's generational. So it seemed like graduates that graduated up through about the 1970s, mid-1980s, tended to be more aligned with our Constitution and what that means. But mid-80s and beyond, and remember, you saw the history here, You know, they were already infiltrating our schools. So we had a lot of these young people before they even showed up at the academy were already getting indoctrinated through the K through 12 system and the universities for the officers. So the academies only put out about 20% of the officer corps. The other 80% come through the ROTC programs on university campuses and OCS. So it's more of a generational thing. And so what we're doing, we're trying to educate the current generation. So, and hopefully that pushes it back, so.
Anyone else? Okay. Ms. April?
So in the big long thing that was scrolling through all the things that happened in the last decade, it looked like most of the things started with the Air Force Academy as opposed to any of the other military service branches. Why was that, and is that correct?
If I heard you right, you were asking if the Air Force Academy was more woke than the other service academies. Okay. I think it is. That's my take. We're working pretty closely with West Point, the Naval Academy, the Coast Guard Academy, the Merchant Marine Academy. Merchant Marine Academy is pretty bad. Probably the wokest. And you probably saw the news and the headlines where they had this large painting of Jesus calming folks that were in a rescue boat in the open sea during a stormy time. Well, an Air Force Academy graduate was responsible for convincing the superintendent there at the Merchant Marine Academy to put that painting in the basement. So that was pretty woke. But I think because the Air Force Academy was probably the youngest and we were still becoming institutionalized as we were forming our routines and traditions and that sort of thing, we probably were a little bit more vulnerable to what was happening, the cultural changes taking place in society at large. So I think they were just vulnerable because they just didn't really have a very solid foundation in terms of traditions. So I'm speculating. And I would actually defer to General Bishop to offer his thoughts on that response because he's been working with the superintendents behind the scenes and whatever, the commandants. So he's been somewhat of a mentor to certain leaders now in active duty. Sir, you want to comment on that?
I'd say the Air Force Academy was up there, certainly in the top 5, because there's only 5. Yeah, Mike and I think we'd probably say Coast Guard Academy, because the Coast Guard Academy during COVID made cadres of upper-class cadets who were vaccinated follow unvaccinated cadets everywhere they went, even into the bathroom. Can you imagine that? To make sure their masks were wearing up. And that's the only academy, thanks to the collective efforts of STARRS, that we lost cadets from. We were able to with all the lawsuits we brought forth, no academy except the Coast Guard kicked any cadets out. Coast Guard kicked 7, we got 5 back in.
I'd like to put some clarity on the question you had about how many Marxists are in the military now. I would say extremely few pure Marxists, but what we do have is a lot of leaders and others that were indoctrinated with the DEI philosophy, which you have seen is based on Marxism. And so they tend to think in those terms, those that have been indoctrinated in terms of identity groups. But again, the good news is, and I want to leave it on this point, is we are pushing back as a country. We're pushing back hard. We're making really good progress out there, as we already said, illustrated by the enlistment rates and retention rates. So we're headed in the right direction. What's happened is the pendulum has swung way to the left, and now we're swinging back toward the center. And that's going to take continued work, and that's what we're doing.
Hold on, John.
But like you said, to make it permanent, the Congress has to take the action, and that's who we need to work on, because all these executive orders, like you said, are a seesaw.
Yep. Exactly. And guess what? Congress comes from our communities. So education has to reach down to we the people. So we have to refresh in their minds the tremendous gift we were given by our founding fathers and what they created, this great experiment, grounded in our Judeo-Christian tradition. And so that's why I think churches need to get really involved in this, and not to moralize or whatever, but to celebrate what we have, the blessings. I mean, so many people haven't been exposed to it. And so they've been exposed to only one side of the story. And so we need to balance that out. So anyway, Congress, yeah, that's probably more near term in terms of what we can do to start institutionalizing. But we have to get into that conscious that the Marxists talk about, the conscious level of our citizens. So.
All right, time up. Okay, all right, well. Is the one last question yours? Oh, taking liberty.
With all the conversation that has gone on about this, unbelievable presentation. Thank you so much. Fabulous. But I would love for Ken to plug his class, which starts in the fall. No, it's perfect. They have to hear it. It is the most incredible.
Okay, well, I guess I get to take a little liberty. And so what Linda is referring to is since 2012, we've offered a class here, actually in this room. So many of the people here today have gone through our class on the Constitution of the United States. It's been an absolute joy and pleasure for me to lead that effort over the last 13 years. And with that, I will take final liberty, and I want to thank all the racists that elected me to be chair of the El Paso County Republican Party, one of the 90 largest counties in the country. Yeah, thanks for the inclusion. And so on the back, there are some flyers for our Lincoln Day dinner, which is coming up. None other than Congressman Jim Jordan will be our keynote speaker. That is August 18th. I would love for as many of you that didn't know about it to take a flyer and go onto our website, elpasogop.com, and register to attend that dinner. Again, it's going to be an amazing time. Looking forward to it. And again, I want to thank everyone that came out tonight. I know, again, some people were stopped by the rain, but those that made it through the rain, through the storming rain, came and heard from just an amazing organization. And what you guys are doing is nothing short of direction from the Lord. And so we're grateful for you. Please keep up the good work. Please keep your foot on the pedal. And they had a slide that showed things that we can do. So get involved with your local politics. Reach out to your congressman. We happen to have one that I don't mind so much because he listens. I mean, he really does give us an opportunity to reach out and touch him. And so he was instrumental in helping us land Jim Jordan for Lincoln Day dinner. And with that, I want to let you all go home and get a good night's rest. Please be safe. We pray your safety. We pray, Father, that until we are back together again, keep us, watch over us, and protect us from all hurt, harm, and danger. I pray that in Jesus' name. You're dismissed.